Today, on the early morning show, Black Without Pride, why minority communities fail to achieve success. Let's cue the rooster and get this show started.
Hey man, if you got something that you believe in and you believe that you can do it and nobody else do, just go for it. It's your life.
My life is moving fast, I gotta slow it down. Yeah, now I got it, they all come around. But when I ain't have it, they nowhere to be found. Yeah, I had to stick with the ones who stay down. And now a lot of people say I changed on them, because I'm whipping in the range on them. I don't think I'm acting different, I just found out that these folks ain't in my interest.
Good morning and welcome to the early morning show. Glad to have you. Today we're talking about Black Without Pride, why the black community fails to achieve success. Now, a lot of people have asked me for years, and I come from a black background, why don't we succeed? Well, I'm going to talk about that a little bit today. You see, any community globally either rises or falls based upon their heritage. Based upon their heritage and their culture. Heritage and culture, that's what you know people today. When I say a particular race, or culture like Chinese, or Japanese, or whatever, it's what you think about. Heritage and culture is where they are now based upon where they were in the past. Now, when we talk about the black race, we're talking about a broken culture or broken heritage that separates them from achieving what they could today. So, when we don't talk about such things like rap music or why do black men have their pants down, that really has nothing to do with anything. That style has nothing to do with anything. It doesn't stop you from making it. But a broken heritage and a broken culture stops achievement in that community, whether you're black male or black female. You get a certain pace and you get knocked back. What is that line? You go forward 2 steps and back 1. What my grandfather said, the crabs in the barrel mentality. The crabs in the barrel mentality, if you ever been to a fisherman's wharf where they store crabs in a big wooden barrel and they got the crabs stacked on top of each other. And you notice that the crabs at the top, they may try to get out of the barrel. And just before they get out in the barrel, one crab grabs the other crab's leg and pulls him back down in the barrel. My grandfather told me about this. And he's called the crabs in a barrel mentality, where a community can pull itself down if one individual tries to escape that negative behavior. But let's talk about heritage and culture, where the black community comes from and why it can't succeed today unless it lets go of that particular heritage. Because a lot of people, they can hold on to their heritage. It will help them. But in the black community, letting go of that helps. Remember, not the clothing, not the music. Now let's talk about the black race in America with culture and heritage, because they don't have one. You see, the black culture in America originates from slavery. Okay? So slavery in America occurred from 1619 to 1865. 1619 to 1865. For you, those who don't know how to do the math so quick, that's actually 246 years. 246 years. Which brings us to the Martin Luther King I Have a Dream speech that he did at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., the city where I was born at. He did that in 1963. So that means that if we go from 1865, when Lincoln emancipated the slaves, and we go all the way to 1963 when he did the I Have a Dream speech in front of a crowd of about 1 million people in Washington, D.C., right? That's 100 years difference. Okay, so we go from end of slavery to Martin Luther King giving that speech. You got about 100 years, 98 years, just 2 years short of 100 years. Now, if we go from that I Have a Dream speech and Martin Luther King's death, which he died assassinated about 5 years later in 1968. If we go from 1968 to the current year 2021, that's another 60 years. Okay? So like I said, we go from 1619 to when blacks were slaves legally in this country, all up to 2021 yesterday. That's a lot of years. So the black culture or the black heritage in America does not come from Africa. So a lot of people, when I was born and I was a young child growing up in the 60s and 70s, a lot of blacks thought that it was a black heritage from Africa, but that's not from Africa.
You're watching MNN, the Men's Channel.
We're 246 years separated from Africa of the slavery time in the United States. You would have lost any of that. Remember before I told you that you have culture and heritage. So if I say a Chinese heritage in this country, it originates from China. And so Chinese have a positive outlook of the 1,000 years that they had becoming a culture and nation in China before they came over here. If you're a Japanese citizen, you have what you had over 1,000 years of culture in Japan coming to the United States. You can look back on that. Any other group that's minority in this country, they can also go back to where they came from and look back at those hundreds of thousands of years as a heritage before their culture landed here in the United States. And the black culture is not the same thing. All they can do is look back to 246 years of slavery before the African landed on the shore here. That 246 years erases any heritage, any culture out of that. You see? So a black person here can't say, I'm looking back to blacks in Africa who had spears or shields and great kings of Africa and queens of Africa. You can't look back to that. You can only look back to your heritage here. So a Japanese person and a Chinese person in this country, they can actually look back to the heritage arriving here up to now. And that would be a heritage and a culture worth copying. But blacks come from a culture and a heritage of being slaves. And from that, you had a defeatist attitude. And so a lot of things we do as black people, we operate out of defeatist attitude. The black church was originated from a slave time period for blacks. Okay, so even that church preaches a certain defeatist type behavior, a certain we are victim mentality. When you see shows on television, when they're associated with blacks, when they talk about things like Black Lives Matter, the larger culture that's doing much better sees blacks as victims. You are a victim from slavery. Okay? So when we have communities, that community does not grow because it is a community that was trained up from a slavery, from a servitude mindset, from a victim mindset. And so we're better at going out and serving other communities for income instead of serving ourselves income or thinking of yourself in a better way. So any concepts that we have as a black culture comes out of that slave mentality. The way young black children outlook. The way we need support from other communities instead of just doing it ourselves. That's a needy, clingy type slave mentality. Okay? Now, before I get lost in translation and you think that I don't like blacks, I do. Like I said, my grandfather's black. My whole family is black. Okay? But in the black community, from a standpoint of being a victim, you get tired of it. From a standpoint of the White House or any house helping blacks, as victims, you get tired of it. When is the victimization going to stop? Remember, 246 years of slavery. 100 years from slavery to Martin Luther King. 60 years from King to yesterday, 2021, and still to be seen as victims in slave mentality. So remember, all cultures and heritage rise or fall based upon that heritage. So in the black community, you have a heritage of slavery. So you don't have a heritage of, we got off the ship from Africa yesterday, so we know about the African culture, like other cultures have. If you were a Russian, you came from Russia. And when you landed in the United States, you had a heritage. You didn't have a heritage of, when you landed here, you were a slave. You don't have that kind of heritage. So anything that the black community practices today that caused them to failure, I can't make it. We're victims. There's a system against us. That comes from out of a slave mentality, out of victim mentality. The oppressor and the oppressee. So for the early morning show, this has been Charles Rivers. If you enjoyed this show, give it a thumbs up, spread it with your friends. Say whatever you want to say about it. But as long as you don't operate off of a victim mentality, off of a slave mentality, and as a black community, if we want to move forward, the only thing we have to stop is our heritage and our culture. That heritage and culture comes out of slave mentality, out of slavery, not an African mentality. That's a different thing. Our heritage that we have today operates only off of a slave mentality, a fear of a superior, and everybody else sabotage each other at the bottom and fight for what they can eat, scraps of food. Thank you for watching. We'll see you again soon. Enjoy your day.
Living in my own world. 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 Oh, state of mind. California dreaming. State of mind. California scheming. Oh, state of mind. California is the reason. For this golden state of mind. State of mind. California dreaming. California scheming. California is the reason. For this golden state of mind. Open mind and you'll find what you've been missing. Please don't waste my time and never try to tell me different. There I go again, ignore my own advice. But take my word for it, man, I've been living nice. Like the bottom of some skis on a January morning. Up in Aspen sipping cocoa, I prefer my women foreign. Don't disturb me if I'm snoring, let me be. Cause you gotta get your rest to be a king. I would not expand your mind, girl, you too fine not to. Don't let me leave with someone that is